Elon Musk buying Twitter, US aid to Ukraine, and Kevin McCarthy. I'm Adam Bearne, and this is the Square Circle. Hello and welcome to the Square Circle. I'm your host, Adam Bearne. As always, we have three guests with us today, and we will start by saying hello to Libertarian podcast host, Remso Martinez. How are you doing?
Adam, it's always a pleasure to be on.
We also have Progressive and Executive Director of Repro Action, Erin Matson. Hi, Erin.
Hey, Adam. Good to see you.
And last but not least, we have Conservative and Contributing Editor for Newsweek, Peter Roff. Hi there, Peter.
Hello, Adam. How are you?
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for being here. This week's big story was Elon Musk's pending purchase of Twitter. And here's some coverage from ABC News.
This morning, Twitter accepting Elon Musk's $44 billion all-cash offer to buy the company and take it private. News of the deal met with shock, concern, and cheers across, well, Twitter. Musk tweeting he wants to make Twitter better than ever, adding that the platform has tremendous potential.
Twitter has become kind of the de facto town square.
Musk has been open about his desire for free speech and to make Twitter more transparent. He signaled possibly bringing back banned accounts, kicking bots off the platform, and giving users an edit button, something he addressed at a recent TED conference.
I think you'd only have the edit capability for a short period of time, and probably the thing to do upon the edit would be to zero out all retweets and favorites.
So, Remso Martinez, Elon Musk says that he's mainly concerned with the truth. So is this purchase going to bring more truth to Twitter?
You know, I wanted to celebrate because I'm a fan of the troll God King himself, but I think a lot of people are maybe popping the champagne a bit too early. I want to see action over rhetoric. It's only been a couple of days by now, and it will take probably weeks to months to actually see what actually happens. He said a lot of things that I want to hear, which is he's going to make it a more neutral ground. He's going to, turn a lot of the code into open source so that way people can audit everything and make their own sites and apps, and he's going to look at end-to-end encryption like in the Signal and Telegram apps I love in the Twitter messaging portion of the site. So, I mean, he's saying a lot of good things. Now I just want to see him do it.
Erin Matson, where do you stand on this potential takeover of Twitter?
Well, Adam, I just want to respond as a human being. I'm heartbroken about it. I think, Elon Musk makes a fantastic car. Love his cars. But as far as putting him in charge of free speech as something that he says he's fighting for, it's really scary. I have participated in and helped support Amnesty International report about violence against women online. Two different incarnations of it. And bullying and harassment is an enormous problem for women, for people of color, for transgender and gender nonconforming people. And so I think it's really important, there's issues about incitement to violence online that, I think Elon Musk is from an era of the internet where he doesn't have a modern sense and understanding of what the risk of violence is, and in particular for people from marginalized groups. So, I think a lot about how he said that he hopes that his critics will stay on Twitter. And he says that's what free speech is. And that's not actually. Free speech is not Elon Musk compelling people to show up. It is creating a safe space, and particularly an open square. I mean, we should talk more about what safe space means. I'm sure that Peter and Remso would love to jump on that and say something about it. But the fact of the matter is, if people are fearing violence, they cannot participate in public debate. And at this point, social media is critical for democracy.
So, Peter Roff, back to our question, and will there be more truth on Twitter if Elon Musk buys it? And will it be or should it be a safe space, as Erin Matson says?
Mr. Musk did not like the way Jack Dorsey and his successors were running Twitter. At least this is what he says. And so he decided to try and influence corporate policy, first by buying shares to get him a board seat, And then when the board took steps to make sure that he'd have minimal influence as a board member, he made an offer to buy the company. Now, this became interesting because the liberals, the progressives who think Twitter is their domain, responded by taking steps that ran contrary to the fiduciary interests of the shareholders. And in a public company, that's unlawful. So the board put themselves at risk. Eventually, I think probably to avoid a lawsuit, they acceded to Musk's offer and agreed to sell him the company. Now, it is true that much of the online conversation is the national conversation now, certainly among millennials, Xers, Yers, Zers, and whatever comes after the Z. Not so much boomers like me, but for young people, how you can have a meaningful national conversation without all opinions having the ability to be heard, not the right, but the ability to be heard, is not a question for government to resolve, in my view. You resolve it by competitors creating new platforms, which is what Parler tried to do, but then they got shut down by the web hosters, or somebody comes along and buys the company to change the policy, which is what's happened here. And so I think at the end of the day, it all appears to have worked out well. You did not have the government having to intercede. But again, seriously looking at Twitter, it's like a gymnasium full of people, all of whom are yelling something, and no one is listening to what anybody else is saying.
Remso, Erin points out the harassment problem on Twitter that a lot of Elon Musk's critics bring up. You just called him the troller in chief. He's not going to clean that problem up, is he?
I think it comes down to what he's actually doing. I mean, when Elon Musk makes a joke and hurts somebody's feeling, that's very different than somebody inciting a call to action, such as doxing somebody, inciting violence. I mean, I don't think that's going to change at all. Almost nobody agrees that that type of, harassment should be on any site. But I want to mention something, which is, the people that were saying that they were going to move to Canada when Donald Trump was elected president in 2016 are still in the United States. And the people saying that they are going to delete their Twitter are still saying that on Twitter. I think one of the things that really, brought a smile to my face was that I saw Truth Social on the free apps as the number 1 spot, still above Twitter. It was number 3 at the time. There were a few other beneath. I think Instagram was under that, and it was because what you had a lot of very right-wing people who don't like the fact that Musk is for automation. It threatens their job. He believes in man-made climate change, which a lot of people believe is a Chinese hoax. He says all these things that progressives used to like a few years ago, and they think that this might be an attack. This might be some conspiracy in which this guy pretends to be right-wing one minute and pretends to be left-wing another minute. And just because he's doing something they like now, they don't trust him. So what did all those people do? They went over to Donald Trump's social media. And what's over there? People that agree with them.
Also this week, as the war in Ukraine drags on, President Biden is making the case for more aid from Washington. Here's the president.
We've almost exhausted what we call, the fancy phrase, the drawdown authority that Congress authorized for Ukraine in a bipartisan spending bill last month. Basically, we're out of money. And so that's why today, in order to sustain Ukraine as it continues to fight, I'm sending Congress a supplemental budget request. It's going to keep weapons and ammunition flowing without interruption to the brave Ukrainian fighters and continue delivering economic and humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainian people. This so-called supplemental funding addresses the needs of the Ukrainian military during the critical weeks and months ahead. And it begins the transition to longer-term security assistance that's going to help Ukraine deter and continue to defend against Russian aggression.
So, Erin Matson, $33 billion is a lot of money. Should we be sending it all to Ukraine?
Yes, I agree with it completely, 100%. You know, I will say on a moral level, I am ashamed as a human being to be a part of this planet that has just sat by and watched and allowed Vladimir Putin to go in and terrorize people in this way. War crimes are happening. You know, the last time I was on this podcast, and it's been a while, I remember I was poo-pooed by whoever I was on with. I raised concerns about World War III, and that's absolutely what Putin is trying to start. So yes, I appreciate that it's a lot of money, and I know people will fight about it politically, but just to be real, people are being killed in a democratically elected country by an authoritarian who wants to restart a world war and is engaged in nuclear saber rattling. I mean, I get it, why there's reticence to get involved, but it's really shameful that so many people have had to die, and Ukraine needs the support.
Remso Martinez, your thoughts on President Biden's new proposal for $33 billion in additional aid?
Where's the money coming from? Like, who actually, each time we go ahead and give aid out to a country, one, that's unconstitutional. We shouldn't be sending taxpayer money overseas. Secondly, it's at this point where it's like, each time this happens, the money tends to disappear. We don't actually know where the money ultimately goes. And if people are curious about that, I'd like to see where all the millions and millions of dollars that we went ahead and threw into Iraq that disappeared went. DOD doesn't know. What about Afghanistan? DOD is fuzzy about those numbers. What about every other country we send aid to? In North Africa, East Asia? It's getting to the point where it's like, we keep throwing money into these situations, war or not war, and that causes all types of quagmires. Listen, man, I'm calling you from a one-bedroom apartment in Milwaukee. Here's what I know about this situation. It usually doesn't end well for anybody when we want to go ahead and start picking who's going to get involved in this. Is Putin a good guy? Absolutely not. Is Zelensky a good guy? I don't know how I feel about him, to be quite honest. But what I do know is that if we're going to do this, and then Russia goes ahead and launches a giant EMP blast, let's go ahead and assume that, or they go ahead and start sending malware into our infrastructure, and then we're like, oh, why would they do that? Maybe it's because we were funding the people that they're fighting against. If we're going to go ahead and get into a war, we might as well just say it. We might as well just get into it, and then we have to go ahead and accept the consequences of that. But here's what I'm getting into, man. Hunker down, because if we thought the lockdowns were bad, I agree with Erin. World War III would be much worse. I think Americans and people around the world need to start understanding that governments go to war, people don't go to war, and people have to defend themselves and take care of themselves. And that's where my mindset is right now.
Peter Roff, I definitely want to get back to some of Erin and Remso's points, but just first of all, your take on this new proposal.
I met briefly with a member of the Ukrainian parliament this week. They don't want money. They want stuff. They want javelins, they want airplanes, they want bulletproof vests, they want ammunitions, they want anti-aircraft missiles, they want stuff. And we could give them that. But the Biden administration, which has been leading from behind since this crisis started, is afraid that those kind of transfers would be too provocative. So give them the money, let them buy the stuff at high markup prices in the international arms market. That may have been a neat strategy when it was used under the Reagan administration to bring support for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan without the Russians being able to put their finger directly on who was doing it, even though we knew they knew and they knew we knew they knew. There was no provocation. Putin has bitten off a lot more than he could chew. His army is being badly defeated. People are defecting. Generals are being killed. The soldiers don't understand why they're there. I do think that this war is popular even in Russia, except maybe among the remaining Stalinists who are still hanging around in the hopes that someone will come along, perhaps Vladimir the Great, and rebuild greater Tsarist Russia. Putin's saber rattling is a distraction. It's an effort to look tough. Sun Tzu, when you're in a position of weakness, behave like you're strong. When you're in a position of strength, behave like you're weak. Well, Putin's about as weak as you can get, and so he's trying to behave like he's strong. The next target potentially is a NATO country. That triggers Article 5. That brings all of the NATO members, including the United States, into the contest. He would be a fool to do that. I give him credit for having some measure of self-preservation. If he were to order that, he would probably be assassinated by his own people because he knows they know what that would mean. The Russian army that we're dealing with today is not the Russian army of the 1980s or the 1940s. It is a shell of incompetence that has been sapped by corruption, by favoritism, by poor training, by poor logistics, and by poor equipment. You'll note that Putin today shut off the natural gas to Poland and to one other European country.
Bulgaria.
Okay, but spring is coming. It's not like it's November and everyone's going to freeze to death. Again, this is more bluster. Putin ought to be looking for a way out and not worrying about what the United States, the Germans, the Poles, or anybody else is doing to help Ukraine. Putin needs to be looking for a way out before his own people take him out, because he has become a liability.
But let's move on, because finally this week, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy found himself in the headlines. Here's the story from CBS News.
House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy is patching up holes in his political future after another leak.
But our members have got to start paying attention to what they say, too, and you can't put up with that type of shit.
In audio recorded days after the January 6th attack and released by the authors of the new book, This Will Not Pass, McCarthy tells colleagues he's worried some House Republicans were endangering others.
Tension is too high. The country is too crazy. I do not want to look back and think we caused something or we missed something and someone got hurt.
The Republican leader weathered a political storm last week when another January 2021 recording surfaced in which he told colleagues he was planning to recommend Donald Trump resign. The audio leaked just hours after McCarthy denied doing so.
So, Peter Roff, if Republicans do take over the House after November's elections, as many political pundits are predicting is a real possibility, will Kevin McCarthy be the Speaker?
I'd put it at about 60-40 right now.
That he will.
That he will be Speaker. McCarthy survived his undiplomatic comments towards President Trump regarding the events of July 6th that were leaked, in part because the story broke in the left side of the American journalistic bubble, partly because the people who were suspected of having been the leakers internally were people like Liz Cheney, who is almost now universally despised within the Republican conference for her cooperation with Nancy Pelosi on the January 6th commission. And because there isn't yet a viable alternative. Most of the big mouths in the House Freedom Caucus, the same kinds of people who joined with the hard lefties like AOC in voting against aid to Ukraine today, do not have the constituency among the other members. And there is no obvious successor. The problem with McCarthy is that he has not accomplished anything significant in his time in Congress. He has not led a major coalition, passed a major piece of legislation, or done anything except with Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor, neither of whom are in Congress now, write a book about the need for the Republicans to have some new ideas that are different from the old line Reagan conservatism. This has led Republicans to chat up the idea that McCarthy's only real principle is that I'm going to do what's best for myself at any given time, that he has no deeper convictions than himself. And there are a lot of members in the House who are willing, I think, to settle for that because they are hungry to be in the majority again. I think that there are activists and donors who are not comfortable with that. And they acted several years ago to influence Mr. McCarthy's decision not to seek the speakership when John Boehner announced his unexpected retirement, which is how Paul Ryan got to be speaker. I am not sure that the concerns that existed then have gone away in this group of influential people. And what happened this past week with the release of the tape that McCarthy successfully argued had been edited to his disadvantage may be the first shoe of several to drop. If there's nothing else, he will be speaker. If there are other things that are going to come dribbling out over the next few months and McCarthy's issues become a distraction, I think you may see someone else or several other Republican House members put themselves forward as alternatives to McCarthy as leader, which may result in an entire slate of alternative candidates to the current elected leadership.
Okay, so Erin Matson, to get back to our main question, I'm sure you would contest the fact that Republicans could take over the House after November's election. But if they did, do you think Kevin McCarthy would be able to hang on and become Speaker?
Well, I'd like to just focus on something that seems really important to elevate here, which is he lied. He lied. He said he didn't say it, and then it was on the tape, and he lied about it. I mean, to me, that's just so disappointing for someone who wants to be majority leader again, that he can't even speak the truth to the press. I mean, he knows that his caucus has gone mad, and he openly admitted that after January 6th, and now is trying to kowtow and be part of the Trump clique again. I think it remains to be seen if he'll be held in leadership. And I think there's probably Republicans on all sides who are very afraid of the outcome. Either way, if he in the instance that Republicans take the House again, that he would become majority leader once again. I think there are probably a sizable segment of Republicans that are afraid of that. And conversely, I think there are a number of Republicans that would be terrified of someone else coming in, presumably coming out of something like the Freedom Caucus or from the Marjorie Taylor Greene bent. So it certainly, it doesn't seem that there's support among that caucus for someone of the ilk of a Liz Cheney.
Remso Martinez, I wonder where you are on this with Kevin McCarthy being caught in a lie, as Erin says. Could he possibly become Speaker after that?
Why is everyone so surprised that Kevin McCarthy is a liar? So are all his friends and all his enemies and everyone else there. This doesn't surprise me one bit. That doesn't change my opinion of him. I worked for a gentleman who only served one term in Congress. To not embarrass him, I won't say his name, but he told me once that man is like Tony Soprano. He can survive a lot. And when you look at a majority of Republican voters, when it comes close to election day, they'll say better red than anything else. And he'll probably just glide past that. And then you'll have a bunch of people say, well, we can get rid of him during the next Republican administration, whenever that is. I won't be voting in this upcoming election because I don't think Republicans deserve a majority. That's certainly not saying I believe that the Democrats deserve it. I think they've all failed. I think the war in Ukraine is actually a gift for a lot of people because they've gotten us to forget that for the past several years, the government literally shut down our lives. Republicans have failed to stand up and remind people, hey, remember when they locked down your business? Remember when they arrested gym owners? Remember when they shut down your churches and made sure that, your whole livelihood disappeared, but here's $1,200.
Okay, well, thank you all for your thoughts on that. It's time now to take some questions from our viewers and or listeners, and we go back to our top story for this one. And Vanessa Cross asks, 1 year from now, do you think Twitter will be vastly different or only slightly different? Will it be better or worse? Who'd like to take that?
I will. I think it's going to be different. I think when you look at some of the things that Musk wants to do, I'm really excited, as I mentioned at the top of the show, about the end-to-end encryption. No Big Brother, no Zuckerberg, nobody looking at your messages except you and the person that you want to see it. I think making the everything open source is going to go ahead and allow for more transparency. It's going to allow for a lot of innovation. I think a lot of great things are going to come out of it. Think of all the businesses that will start. Think of all the opportunities that will start to build communities for people to develop things that nobody ever thought of. It's beautiful.
Erin Matson, what scale of change is coming to Twitter then, do you think?
Well, I think that question is impossible to answer right now because, look, a sale isn't closed until it's closed. And there are conditions placed on Mr. Musk, who, as we know, has run afoul of the Securities and Exchange Commission before. And even there was a clause in the contract that said that he wouldn't disparage Twitter's current employees or leadership. And in fact, he did. And now there's somebody in Twitter's top leadership who's receiving racist, sexist hate. Granted, it wasn't in the context, it was in the context of criticizing a past decision that she made. It wasn't in the context of her work with relation to the sale. But I think given the, how do I put this delicately? The volatility of Mr. Musk in making decisions, it's, this deal isn't done until it's done. And so once the deal has been done, then I would feel comfortable answering a question about a year from now. But I think it really remains to be seen whether this deal actually goes through.
Certainly it will make the contract lawyers happy, I'm sure. But Peter Roff, you just seem glad there's not a government takeover of Twitter. But do you see large-scale changes coming?
I think the functionality will change, which will potentially add more subscribers to Twitter than there are. It would be nice if some of them were grown-ups who realized that there are more important things in life than people expressing what Erin called racist, sexist hate in anonymous posts or pseudonymous posts online.
Let's take another question then from Peter Bradley. And this is, of course, on the war in Ukraine. And Peter asks, if the Russian military can't even defeat Ukraine, then why are we so afraid of engaging with them? Erin, why don't you start us on that?
I mean, it's a very simple answer. I think people are afraid of mushroom clouds and nuclear war.
Yeah, they do have the most nuclear weapons of anyone in the world. So that seems like a reasonable concern. Remso, do you share that? Or do you think, any open conflict between the US and Russia could remain non-nuclear?
It used to be something that was spoken in the realm of theory, but it's actually something that has kept me up at night. I'm afraid of a possible cyber 9/11. And I don't say that exaggeratively. The number of malware attacks, the number of spying, and I don't know this type of stuff. I just know the term, so I apologize for sounding really stupid. I'll admit it. But basically, a lot of people are trying to get into our infrastructure systems. A lot of people are trying to get into the networks for many U.S. agencies and departments. They're trying to get into our colleges and universities, our hospitals, you name it. A lot of it is being sourced back to Russia. I don't think a mushroom cloud is maybe something that I think is as possible as waking up one day and finding out that I don't exist according to my bank. All my hospital records have suddenly disappeared. I can't verify anything at the DMV. I don't exist digitally.
And I'm not an expert either, but the cybersecurity folks that I know do say that they've been
stuff.
Yeah, they've been surprised by the lack of cyber attacks so far in this conflict. So perhaps more of that to come. Peter Roff, just back to Peter Bradley's question about, how afraid should we really be of the Russian military? I mean, you outlined earlier some of the many problems they have.
On the one hand, I mean, Russia's not a country. It's a gas station with heavily armed attendants who can produce mushroom clouds and who can produce the kind of cyber attacks that Remso is talking about. And I have to believe that there are people at least close to President Putin who understand the kind of biblical destruction that would be rained down on Moscow and perhaps other Russian cities. If the Russians were to use even theater nuclear weapons to avoid being driven from Ukraine, I'm not going to say losing, because in that scenario, everybody loses. But this is certainly a test of Kissinger's theory that we won't blow you up because you'll blow us up. Aptly named MAD, for mutually assured destruction. The same thing exists, I believe, in cyber world. That one of the reasons the Russians have not engaged in the kinds of cyber attacks that Remso is talking about is because our defenses are better, not perfect, but better. We have more redundancies because we have a strong and robust economy that allows us to support redundant systems, and because our ability to strike back is at least as good as their ability to hit us, and their ability to recover is much worse or much more inhibited than our ability to bring things back online. Whereas absent an electromagnetic pulse that simply destroys the functionality of entire systems and redundancies, a system that they took down that might take us 18 hours to get back online might take them 18 days. And they just can't afford that.
Okay, and certainly the Biden administration not so subtly hinting that America does indeed have fairly strong capabilities in that arena. But let's start wrapping up the show with my favorite regular segment, which is where our guests tell us what they think the most underreported story of the week was. Who'd like to begin?
There's a man in Japan who married a hologram of an anime character a couple of years ago. He spent $17,000 on the wedding, which no one but his friends showed up to. His family was like, this is kind of weird. Well, apparently the software that goes ahead and makes this hologram actually like talk and interact with him like a sexy Siri or something. Apparently it stopped working, and now his hologram wife can't communicate with him. So according to him, they're having a hard time bonding.
Well, that is sad on all sorts of levels. Peter Roff, do you have anything cheerier for us?
My underreported story is a recent poll from the Rasmussen firm that show that Democratic voters overwhelmingly agree that Russia is responsible for Hillary Clinton losing the election in 2016. In their survey, they found that 47% of likely US voters believe it likely that Russian interference changed the outcome of the 2016 presidential election, including 26% who say it's very likely. Now, I raise this because we have had a consistent continuing pounding on people who even question the outcome of the 2020 presidential election, including efforts to deny certain people their opportunity to run for re-election to Congress. And we call them insurrectionists. I don't know what we call these Clinton voters, but they seem to me to be at least as culpable in spreading dishonest claims about election fraud and manipulation as anything the Trumpers are doing.
Erin, bring us home. Do you have something for us? Your most underreported story this week?
Yeah, just unionization at Starbucks. It's now at 26 stores, I believe. And Howard Schultz was brought back in to try to tamp down the union. And as somebody who worked for Starbucks during the first reign of Howard Schultz, I mean, it was a good company, and he put a lot of effort into, and the company put a lot of effort into trying to make it a good place for their employees. And I think what's happening now is that he is dramatically misreading this moment about how to show up in a union battle within his company. I think he had an opportunity to dig into the values that the company has espoused for a long time and try to show up in a different way as a leader. And instead, he's decided to go to battle, and he thinks he can just ride it out like it's the early 2000s or the late 90s. And I don't think it's going to go that way for him. You know, I was in a Starbucks today and just looking, it's so different now from when I was there. They've got screens up. It's like virtually like a drive-through, an automated thing. And they're doing all of these complicated frozen blended drinks. It's not the same as, you know, the art of coffee that it used to be.
Okay. Well, thank you all for that. Maybe we'll get a lighter story next week. Our viewers and listeners will have to tune in. But it is all we have time for. So thank you to our guests, Erin Matson, Remso Martinez, Peter Roff. Thank you all so much. And thank you for watching or listening, if you have been, to The Square Circle. Please do subscribe to our channel, like this video, or give this episode a 5-star rating on your podcast platform. I'm Adam Bearne, and we'll see you next week.